Jack the Ripper, the monster who turned London into a city of fear. The sound of distant footsteps echoes through the darkness. A woman gasps. Church bells ring twice. A horse-drawn carriage rattles over wet cobblestones. Then, silence. London, the wealthiest city on earth, the heart of the British Empire, a place of towering banks, royal palaces, and factories that powered the modern world. But hidden just a few streets away from unimaginable wealth was another London. A London most people never saw. A city buried beneath darkness. A place where thousands lived in poverty. Where crime was routine. Where disease spread through overcrowded streets. And where death could arrive without warning. This was Whitechapel, a district so dangerous that even police officers feared walking its narrow alleys alone after midnight. Then, during the autumn of 1888, someone began hunting women. Not for robbery, not for revenge, but for something far more disturbing. His murders were so brutal, so precise, and so horrifying that they stunned even seasoned investigators. The newspapers couldn't stop writing about him. The public demanded justice. The police launched one of the largest manhunts Victorian England had ever seen. Yet the killer simply disappeared. No arrest, no confession, no certainty. Only questions. Questions that have haunted the world for more than a century. He would become history's most infamous unidentified serial killer. The name that still sends chills through true crime history? Jack the Ripper. To understand Jack the Ripper, you first have to understand Whitechapel. Before you continue, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you. Victorian London was a city divided. Just a short distance from elegant neighborhoods filled with aristocrats and businessmen stood East London, one of the poorest urban districts in Europe. Thousands of immigrants had settled there. Factories employed workers for long hours and meager wages. Families crowded into filthy lodging houses where entire rooms were shared by strangers. Many people slept wherever they could find shelter. Some paid only a few pennies for a bed. Others couldn't even afford that. They slept sitting upright on ropes stretched across overcrowded rooms. Disease was common. Alcoholism devastated families. Violence was ordinary. And prostitution became one of the few ways many desperate women could earn enough money to survive another night. Police records estimated that thousands of prostitutes worked the streets of Whitechapel. Many were homeless, many struggled with alcoholism, many lived one meal away from starvation. They became easy targets. Few people noticed when they disappeared, until one killer changed everything. On the morning of August 31st, 1888, a carman named Charles Cross was walking to work along Bucks Row before dawn. The street was quiet, almost empty. Then he noticed what appeared to be a bundle lying in the darkness. As he moved closer, he realized it was the body of a woman. Her name was Mary Ann Polly Nichols. She was 43 years old, a mother, separated from her husband, living in poverty. She had spent the evening trying to earn enough money for a bed at a lodging house. She never made it back. Her throat had been cut deeply. When doctors examined her body, they made another horrifying discovery. Her abdomen had been brutally mutilated. This wasn't a simple murder. The injuries suggested extraordinary violence inflicted in only a matter of minutes. Police immediately began searching for a suspect. At first, many believed it was an isolated attack, a drunken assault, perhaps a robbery gone wrong. But they were wrong, terribly wrong. Only 8 days later. On September 8th, another woman's body was discovered. Her name was Annie Chapman. She was 47 years old, like Nichols. She struggled with poverty. She had spent the night searching for money to pay for lodging. She never returned. Her body was found in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. The killer had struck again, and this time, the injuries were even more horrific. Her throat had been cut, her abdomen had been opened, some internal organs had been removed. The brutality shocked even experienced medical examiners. Newspapers exploded with headlines. The public became terrified. People whispered that a madman was roaming Whitechapel. Women refused to walk alone after dark. Residents formed neighborhood patrols. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some blamed immigrants. Others believed the murderer was a butcher. Some suspected a doctor because of the precision of certain injuries. No one knew who he was. But everyone had a theory. The Metropolitan Police suddenly found themselves under enormous pressure. Hundreds of officers flooded Whitechapel. Door-to-door interviews were conducted. Thousands of people were questioned. Witness statements poured in. Some claimed to have seen suspicious men. Others reported hearing screams. But Whitechapel was always noisy. Arguments, drunken fights, late-night workers, horse carts, cries in the darkness. Separating truth from rumor proved almost impossible. Forensic science barely existed. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no surveillance cameras. Investigators relied almost entirely on eyewitness testimony, and eyewitnesses often contradicted one another. The killer seemed to vanish into London's maze of narrow streets after every attack. It was as though he knew Whitechapel better than the police themselves, as fear spread across London. The newspapers transformed the murders into national obsession. Every day brought new theories, new suspects, new rumors. The public demanded answers. But something even stranger was about to happen. A letter arrived. It was addressed to the Central News Agency. The writer mocked the police. He claimed responsibility for the murders. He promised there would be more, and at the bottom, he signed it with 2 words the world would never forget: Jack the Ripper. Whether the letter truly came from the killer remains unknown. Many historians believe it was likely a hoax, possibly written by a journalist or another individual seeking attention. However, the name captured the public's imagination and quickly became inseparable from the case. From that moment on, the unknown murderer no longer had to hide behind anonymity. He had a name. A legend had begun, and the worst was still to come. Because within weeks, Whitechapel would witness one of the most horrifying nights in criminal history, a night investigators would forever remember as a cold wind whistles through narrow alleyways. Rainwater drips from rooftops onto uneven cobblestones. A police officer's lantern cuts through the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a church clock strikes 1. By the end of September 1888, Whitechapel had become a city living on borrowed time. Every sunset brought fresh anxiety. Shopkeepers locked their doors earlier than usual. Women walked in groups whenever they could. Landlords barred entrances after midnight. The newspapers published every rumor they could find. Some claimed the murderer was a doctor. Others believed he was a butcher accustomed to handling knives. Still others insisted he was a wealthy gentleman who slipped unnoticed between London's poorest streets. No one knew the truth, but everyone agreed on one thing: the killer was still out there, and he was growing bolder. On the evening of September 29, 1888, 44-year-old Elizabeth Stride wandered through Whitechapel. Born in Sweden, she had lived in London for years. Life had not been kind to her. Like many women in Whitechapel, she struggled with poverty and unstable housing. Historians debate whether she regularly engaged in prostitution, but she was living in the same desperate circumstances that left many women vulnerable. Throughout the evening, several witnesses later reported seeing Stride talking with different men. One described a well-dressed gentleman, another remembered a man carrying a parcel. Their accounts differed so much that investigators struggled to determine whether any of them had actually seen her killer. Just before 1 o'clock in the morning, Elizabeth entered Dutfield's yard off Burner Street. Minutes later, a horse-drawn cart pulled into the yard. Its driver, Louis Diemschitz, guided his pony through the darkness. Suddenly, the animal shied away. Something was lying on the ground. Diemschitz climbed down with his whip in hand. At first, he thought the figure might be drunk. Then someone lit a match. The light revealed a woman lying motionless. Blood still glistened beneath her neck. Elizabeth Stride was dead. Doctors found that Stride's throat had been cut, but something seemed different. Unlike the previous victims, Her body had not been mutilated. Why? Investigators quickly formed a theory. Perhaps the killer had been interrupted. The arrival of the cart may have startled him before he had time to carry out the horrific mutilation seen in the earlier murders. If that theory was correct, the murderer had escaped into the darkness, still driven by the urge to kill. Whitechapel had no idea. He was only getting started. Only about 45 minutes after Elizabeth Stride's body was discovered, police officer Edward Watkins entered Mitre Square during his regular patrol. The square was silent. He walked past warehouses and offices. Nothing appeared unusual. Then, his lantern illuminated a shape lying in the southwest corner. Another woman, another victim. Her name was Catherine Eddowes. She was 46 years old. Earlier that night, she had been arrested for public intoxication. After sobering up, she was released from police custody shortly before 1 a.m. As she walked away, she reportedly joked that she knew her own way home. She never arrived. When doctors examined Catherine Eddowes, even experienced investigators were shaken. Her throat had been cut, her face had been slashed, her abdomen had been opened, several internal organs had been removed. The injuries were among the most extensive seen in the Whitechapel murders. Medical experts concluded that the killer had worked with astonishing speed. He had carried out the attack, completed the mutilations, and escaped. All before another police patrol entered the square. The murderer seemed to vanish within minutes. It was a level of confidence that terrified investigators. This was no longer a killer acting on impulse. He appeared calm, methodical, comfortable operating in the middle of a city filled with police. News spread through London before sunrise. 2 women, killed within the same hour, barely a mile apart. The newspapers quickly gave the night a name, the double event. Public fear exploded. If one killer had committed both murders, then he had struck twice before dawn and escaped twice. The Metropolitan Police faced intense criticism. So did the City of London Police, whose jurisdiction included Mitre Square. For the first time, 2 separate police forces were investigating crimes believed to have been committed by the same murderer. Communication was difficult, records were shared slowly, and precious time slipped away. Meanwhile, the killer remained free at approximately 2:55 a.m. Police officer Alfred Long made a discovery that would become one of the most controversial pieces of evidence in the entire investigation. In the doorway of a building on Goulston Street, he found a blood-stained piece of Catherine Eddowes' apron. Above it, written in chalk on the wall, was a message. The exact wording remains disputed because it was copied down slightly differently by different officials, but it referred to the Jews or Jews and suggested they would not be blamed for nothing. Almost immediately, a debate erupted. Was the writing left by the killer, or had it already been on the wall? No one knew. London was already tense with anti-immigrant and anti-Semitic sentiment. Police Commissioner Sir Charles Warren feared that daylight crowds might interpret the message as an accusation against the city's Jewish community, potentially triggering violence. Before sunrise, he ordered the writing erased. The decision remains controversial to this day. Some believe crucial evidence was destroyed forever. Others argue that preventing unrest was the responsible choice. Because the message was erased before it could be photographed, historians can never know whether it was connected to the killer at all. After the double event, Whitechapel changed overnight. Women refused to walk the streets alone. Many lodging houses stayed awake until dawn. Volunteer patrols formed across the district. Men armed themselves with clubs, walking sticks, and whistles. Every stranger became a suspect. Doctors, butchers, sailors, foreigners, even police officers. Rumors overwhelmed facts. Newspapers published sensational headlines, sometimes exaggerating details or repeating unverified claims. The killer seemed almost supernatural. He appeared, he murdered, then he disappeared, without a trace. The double event revealed something investigators had feared but could no longer ignore. The murderer was adapting. He understood the streets. He knew how long police patrols took. He selected locations where darkness concealed his movements. He completed his crimes with frightening speed. Whether he lived in Whitechapel or simply knew it well has never been established, but each successful escape made him seem untouchable, and there was one final murder. One crime so brutal that it would shock even those who had become accustomed to horror. The victim's name was Mary Jane Kelly. Her death would forever define the legend of Jack the Ripper. Rain falls steadily against a single window. A fireplace has long gone cold. The streets outside are unusually quiet. Then, 3 loud knocks on a wooden door. No answer. By early November 1888, London had become a city consumed by fear. More than 2 months had passed since the murder of Mary Ann Nichols. 4 women were dead. The killer had escaped every time. The police had interviewed hundreds of witnesses. Thousands of doors had been knocked on. Countless suspects had been questioned. Yet the investigation seemed no closer to an arrest than it had been on the first day. The newspapers mocked the police. Politicians demanded results. Ordinary citizens wondered if anyone was safe. Then, on the morning of November 9th, 1888, Jack the Ripper committed what many investigators consider his most horrific crime. Unlike the previous victims, Mary Jane Kelly was younger. Most historians believe she was about 25 years old, although her exact age is uncertain. Her early life remains largely a mystery. She told different stories about her past. Some said she had come from Ireland. Others believed she was from Wales. There are even disagreements about her real name. Like so much in the Jack the Ripper case, the truth has been lost to history. What is known is this: she lived in a tiny rented room at 13 Miller's Court, just off Dorset Street in Whitechapel. It was one of the poorest streets in London. Unlike the earlier victims, Kelly had something the others did not: a roof over her head. It wasn't much, just a single cramped room, a bed, a small table, a fireplace, a broken window covered with clothing. But it offered privacy, and that privacy would give the killer something he had never had before: time. On the evening of November 8th, Mary Jane Kelly was seen drinking in local pubs. Witnesses later reported seeing her talking with different people throughout the night. One acquaintance remembered Kelly singing softly in her room during the early hours of the morning. Another witness claimed to have seen her walking with a well-dressed man shortly before midnight. As with earlier witness accounts, investigators could not verify every detail, and some descriptions conflicted. Those would be the last confirmed sightings of her alive. Sometime during the early hours of November 9th, the killer entered her room. Unlike his previous attacks, this murder happened indoors. There were no footsteps echoing through narrow alleyways, no risk of a passing carriage interrupting him, no police patrol turning the corner. The small locked room became the scene of unimaginable violence. At around 10:45 that morning, Mary Jane Kelly had fallen behind on her rent. Her landlord's assistant, Thomas Bowyer, was sent to collect the overdue payment. He knocked. No response. He looked through the broken window. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. He immediately ran for help. Police arrived within minutes. Veteran officers who had investigated the earlier murders stood frozen. Nothing had prepared them for what lay inside. Mary Jane Kelly had been murdered with extraordinary brutality. Her throat had been cut. She had suffered extensive post-mortem mutilation far beyond what had been seen in the earlier canonical murders. The room itself reflected the violence of the attack. Blood covered much of the small space. Furniture had been disturbed. The fireplace still contained glowing embers, suggesting the fire had been used during the night, though historians continue to debate exactly what was burned. Medical examiners concluded that the killer had spent far longer with Kelly than with any previous victim. The privacy of the room had removed the greatest obstacle he had faced during earlier attacks: time. This crime marked the peak of the violence associated with the canonical Jack the Ripper murders. Even seasoned investigators struggled to describe what they had witnessed. Victorian newspapers printed only limited details, but those details alone were enough to shock the nation. Police searched Miller's Court inch by inch, every object, every footprint, every possible clue. Witnesses were questioned again. Neighbors recalled hearing faint voices during the night. Some reported hearing a woman cry out, "Murder!" But in Whitechapel, such cries were tragically common. Few people paid attention. Others claimed they had seen suspicious men near the court. Descriptions varied widely. Some mentioned a respectably dressed gentleman. Others described a shabbily dressed laborer. None of the accounts could be confirmed. Without modern forensic science, investigators had little to work with. No fingerprints, no DNA, no blood typing, no surveillance, only memories. And memories fade. As the investigation intensified, letters continued arriving at newspaper offices and police stations. Many claimed to be written by Jack the Ripper. Some mocked investigators. Others promised more killings. A few included disturbing details. Among the most famous were the Dear Boss letter, the Saucy Jackie postcard, and the From Hell letter. The From Hell letter was especially unsettling because it arrived with part of a preserved human kidney. Whether the kidney came from a murder victim has never been conclusively established, and historians remain divided over whether the letter was genuine or another elaborate hoax. Most experts today believe many, perhaps most, of the hundreds of Ripper letters were written by journalists, pranksters, or attention seekers hoping to profit from the public panic. Yet they helped create the mythology surrounding the case. The killer was no longer just a murderer, he had become a legend. After the murder of Mary Jane Kelly, something unexpected happened. The killing stopped. No more murders matching the same pattern were confirmed. No dramatic arrest followed. No confession appeared. The man who had terrified London simply vanished. Did he die? Was he imprisoned for another crime? Did he leave the country? Or had investigators misunderstood which murders belonged to him? No one knows. Even today, historians continue to debate whether all 5 so-called canonical murders were committed by the same person. The uncertainty is one reason the mystery has endured for nearly 140 years. The silence after Mary Jane Kelly's murder only deepened the mystery. If Jack the Ripper truly stopped, why? If he escaped, how? And if he was never identified? Who had been walking among the frightened streets of Whitechapel while one of history's greatest manhunts unfolded around him? The investigation was about to shift. With no new murders to pursue, police turned their attention to the growing list of suspects: doctors, butchers, sailors, foreign visitors, members of the upper class. Even members of the royal family would eventually be swept into decades of speculation. But separating evidence from myth would prove almost impossible. With no new confirmed murders after Mary Jane Kelly, investigators shifted from chasing an active killer to reviewing every clue they had collected. The Metropolitan Police and the City of London Police had interviewed thousands of people and examined hundreds of leads, but Victorian policing had severe limitations. There was no fingerprint identification in routine use, no DNA analysis, no CCTV, and no reliable forensic methods to link a suspect to a crime scene. The investigation was also hampered by conflicting witness statements. Nearly every witness described a different man. Some believed the killer looked respectable, while others described a laborer or sailor. Detectives could not determine which accounts, if any, were accurate. Public frustration grew as newspapers criticized the police almost daily. Rumors spread throughout London, and anyone behaving strangely risked becoming a suspect. Over the next century, dozens of men were proposed as Jack the Ripper. Some were investigated during the murders, while others became suspects decades later. Among the best-known are Aaron Kosminski, Montague John Druitt, Michael Ostrog, George Chapman, Severin Kosofsky. Over the years, many other names, including doctors, butchers, artists, and even members of the British royal family, have been suggested. However, many of these theories are based on speculation rather than historical evidence. Despite countless books, documentaries, and investigations, no suspect has ever been conclusively identified as Jack the Ripper. Several factors likely contributed to the killer's escape. Whitechapel's overcrowded streets made it easy for someone to disappear within minutes. The attacks occurred in darkness, often during the early hours of the morning when few reliable witnesses were present. Police communication between different jurisdictions was less efficient than modern standards. Most importantly, forensic science was still in its infancy. Detectives lacked the tools that modern investigators rely on today. Even if the killer had left fingerprints or biological evidence, investigators in 1888 would have had no way to analyze it. Some historians believe the murder stopped because the killer died, was institutionalized, imprisoned for another offense, or left the area. Others argue that later murders may have gone unrecognized or were committed by different offenders. The truth remains unknown. Jack the Ripper became more than an unidentified murderer. He became a symbol. The case transformed newspaper crime reporting into a form of mass entertainment, with sensational headlines and dramatic illustrations capturing readers' attention around the world. The murders also exposed the harsh realities of Victorian London: poverty, homelessness, alcoholism, overcrowding, and the vulnerability of women living on society's margins. For generations, the case has inspired books, films, television series, academic research, museum exhibitions, walking tours, and countless true crime investigations. The mystery endures because there is no definitive ending. Unlike most famous criminal cases, there was no arrest, no trial, and no confession, only silence. More than a century has passed since terror stalked the streets of Whitechapel. The buildings have changed, the gas lamps are gone, the narrow alleys have been rebuilt, yet the mystery remains. 5 women, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, are widely recognized as the canonical victims whose lives were cut short during those terrifying months in 1888. Their murders became one of history's greatest unsolved criminal investigations. Despite advances in forensic science, decades of historical research, and thousands of pages of investigation, no theory has produced conclusive proof of the killer's identity. The legend of Jack the Ripper continues because the most important question has never been answered. Who was he? Perhaps the truth disappeared with the killer himself, or perhaps it still lies hidden within forgotten documents, waiting to be uncovered. Until then, Jack the Ripper remains history's most infamous unidentified serial killer, and the streets of Whitechapel will forever be remembered as the place where one man's crimes became one of the world's greatest mysteries. Kindly turn your click to kindness by subscribing, like, and comment. Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary informative, consider subscribing for more carefully researched true crime stories based on verified facts, court records, and official investigations. Until next time, stay informed, stay vigilant, and remember that the most unsettling mysteries are often the ones hidden in plain sight.